When you dig into your garden and see a wriggling earthworm, it feels like striking gold. Worms are the engineers of living soil, breaking down organic matter, loosening compacted ground and leaving behind castings that act as nature's richest fertilizer. But here's the unsettling reality many gardeners face. Sometimes the worms disappear. A bed that was once alive with movement suddenly feels empty, the soil cold and lifeless. You might even notice that after adding organic matter, watering and trying your best to care for the ground, the worms still pack up and leave. The question is why? What makes worms abandon a bed, and what can be done to not only bring them back, but to make them stay for good? The truth is that worms are more sensitive than many gardeners realize. Their presence is a direct reflection of soil health, and by understanding their needs, you can transform your garden into a permanent worm sanctuary. To understand why worms vanish, you have to see the soil through their perspective. Worms don't just live underground, they breathe through their skin. That means soil moisture, texture, and chemistry directly determine whether they thrive or suffocate. If the soil dries out, the thin membrane of their skin cannot exchange oxygen, and they retreat deeper or migrate entirely. If the soil becomes waterlogged, the lack of oxygen forces them to flee or risk drowning. Equally important is food. Worms aren't eating dirt, they're eating the microorganisms that colonize decaying organic matter. When food sources vanish or are too tough to digest, worms will not stay. The same applies if conditions turn toxic. Soil that becomes acidic, salty, or laden with synthetic chemicals quickly drives worms away. So when worms pack up and leave, it's not a mystery, it's a survival decision. You know, gardeners often underestimate just how critical moisture is for worm survival. Worms, they need soil that's consistently damp, not dry, not soggy. If your soil swings between extremes, baked dry by the summer sun or waterlogged by poor drainage, well, worms just won't linger. Think of your garden beds as an underground hotel. If the rooms are either flooded or bone dry, those guests check out fast. So, the solution here is building moisture stability. This means, layering mulch over beds to buffer against heat and evaporation. Straw, shredded leaves, or even cardboard can regulate the surface while encouraging worms to forage safely closer to the top. In heavy clay soils that hold too much water, adding coarse organic matter like wood chips or shredded bark creates air pockets. This gives worms the oxygen they need while retaining the dampness they thrive on. Now, if worms have nothing to eat, they move on. And let me tell you, their definition of food is pretty specific: soft, partially decayed organic matter colonized by microbes. Fresh green waste like grass clippings or carbon-heavy browns like dry leaves need to break down first before worms can really use them. That's why you see worms appearing in droves when organic matter hits that sweet spot of decomposition. A mistake many gardeners make is adding materials that are just too coarse or slow to break down, such as large wood chips, dry corn stalks, or even whole cardboard sheets. While these things are useful in other contexts, they really don't provide the microbial buffet that worms seek. To anchor worms in your soil, you need to supply a steady stream of partially rotted food. Kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, aged manure, or shredded leaves all create exactly the right conditions. Better yet, burying organic matter directly into shallow trenches gives worms a real reason to stay localized. Over time, these feeding zones turn into worm highways, transforming the structure of your soil from the inside out. Sometimes worms leave not because of moisture or food, but because the soil itself becomes inhospitable. Synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, or herbicides all disrupt microbial life, and without those microbes, worms starve. Even something as subtle as overusing lime or wood ash can swing soil pH too far toward alkaline, burning the sensitive skin of earthworms. High salt levels, often from chemical fertilizers, are another hidden culprit. Worms can't tolerate salinity, and the osmotic stress drives them away. If you've noticed worms disappearing after applying store-bought products, this could be the cause. The fix is a return to natural soil building, using compost, aged manures, and mineral amendments in moderation rather than chemical shortcuts. Healthy soil teeming with microbes is the only environment worms trust. Earthworms thrive in stable environments. Excessive tilling or constant disturbance shreds the tunnels they build, breaks apart their microbial food sources, and exposes them to predators. While a single dig might not chase them off forever, repeated disruptions create a landscape they can't settle into. This is why no-dig or minimal-till gardening is such a worm magnet. By leaving the soil structure intact and only layering organic matter on top, you allow worms to create their own systems of tunnels, channels, and chambers. Over time, these worm-built highways become the foundation for aerated, self-draining fertile ground that almost manages itself. Another reason worms vanish is temperature. Worms prefer soil that stays between 55 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. When it gets too hot, they burrow deeper in search of cooler zones. In winter, they dive down to avoid freezing. If your garden seems empty during extreme seasons, don't panic. They may simply be out of reach. The trick to stabilizing worm activity is mulching deeply. A 4 to 6 inch mulch blanket insulates the soil, keeping it cooler in summer and warmer in winter. In raised beds, burying organic matter a little deeper also provides worms with a buffer zone against seasonal extremes. By maintaining a moderated soil climate, you encourage worms to stay active in your growing zone instead of fleeing to safer depths. If you want worms to not just visit but take up permanent residence, you must meet their needs on every level. Start with consistent moisture, shielded with mulch. Provide a buffet of organic matter in various stages of decay. Keep chemicals out of the picture and allow microbes to thrive. Avoid constant digging so the soil structure becomes a stable, worm-friendly habitat. And finally, buffer against temperature swings by insulating your soil. You know, there's also a secret weapon in the world of soil health worm feeding stations. By digging holes or burying small buckets with holes drilled into them, filled with kitchen scraps and covered with soil, you create these dedicated zones that worms just love to flock to. These stations keep the food concentrated, encourage localized worm activity, and continually enrich the surrounding soil with their wonderful castings. Over time, this creates a kind of feedback loop. Worms bring in more microbes, the microbes multiply, soil fertility skyrockets, and the worms stay put because, well, conditions are just perfect. So when worms vanish, they're not punishing you, they're actually teaching you something important. Their absence is a signal that something about the soil is unbalanced. Instead of seeing it as a failure, think of it as an opportunity to read the health of your land more closely. By adjusting moisture, adding the right food, and letting the soil ecosystem heal, you'll not only bring the worms back, but also create a garden that sustains them indefinitely. And when they return, the benefits really compound. Worms aerate soil naturally, increase water retention, and enrich every layer with castings full of plant-available nutrients. A bed alive with worms is a bed that resists drought, grows stronger crops, and almost manages itself. So if you've ever wondered why worms sometimes pack up and leave your soil, just remember this. They're survivalists, responding to the conditions you've set. Dryness, lack of food, chemical residues, disturbance, or temperature extremes all send them searching for safer ground. But you know, the flip side is empowering. By adjusting just a few key elements, moisture, organic matter, soil stability, you can turn your garden into a permanent worm sanctuary. Don't see worms as visitors. See them as long-term partners who will stay if you give them reason to. Build a soil that feels like home to them, and they'll reward you with the healthiest, richest garden beds you've ever seen. If this guide opened your eyes to how worms think and what keeps them around, make sure to subscribe to Hydrohaven for more deep-dive soil wisdom. Share this with a fellow gardener who wonders why their worms disappear, and together we'll spread the knowledge that builds living soil everywhere.